This was something that had been going on for not 1, 2, 3, or even 7 years. This was 17 years of offending against hundreds of women and men, actually, who were victims. Then you were brought in because you had enormous experience at solving cases, and you managed to deal with it, didn't you?
Yeah, we just, I looked at it, came up with a possible different approach, and we tried it, and it worked.
In the heart of England, there are stories of ordinary people who have faced extraordinary darkness. But among the shadows, there is one man whose name became synonymous with justice. His career spanned decades, filled with countless cases, but his most infamous moments were spent chasing down some of the most notorious killers in British criminal history. This is the story of Colin Sutton, the Real Manhunter. I wasn't born into a family of detectives. I came from a fairly ordinary background. I just had a drive to make a difference, to solve the puzzle that each case presented. The idea of catching the bad guys, it was that simple for me. Colin Sutton's journey began in the late 1980s when he first entered the world of law enforcement. As a young officer, he knew little of the personal and professional toll that his career would eventually take on him. But what he lacked in experience, he made up for with an innate understanding of the mind of a criminal. Sutton quickly proved his potential, climbing the ranks of the Metropolitan Police Service in London. It was in the early 1990s that Sutton began to earn his reputation. His breakthrough came with his involvement in the investigation of notorious criminals who committed a series of brutal, high-profile murders in London. Colin's ability to study the psychological profiles of killers set him apart from his peers. While others followed the usual investigative path, Sutton looked deeper into the motives behind the crimes. You see, a murder isn't just a crime. It's a window into a person's mind. Understanding that mindset was key. Every killer has a pattern, something that connects them to their actions. My job was to find that connection. Sutton's instincts became more than just theory. They became a key part of some of the most shocking criminal cases of the time. In the late 1990s, one of the most disturbing and elusive serial offenders terrorized the London area. The Night Stalker, as he was known, broke into homes at night, attacked elderly victims, and then vanished without a trace. The city lived in fear. For years, Delroy Grant struck, always staying one step ahead of the police. But it was Colin Sutton's relentless determination that finally cracked the case. We had no idea who he was at first. We had victims, but we didn't have a face, a name, a place. But then, the breakthrough came in 2009. We gathered more evidence, and I knew that the only way to catch him was by understanding how he thought. Through painstaking research and the analysis of hundreds of reports, Sutton identified key patterns in the Night Stalker's attacks. His deep dive into victimology, understanding the unique traits of the elderly victims, led Sutton to connect the dots. In 2009, after a series of breakthroughs, Sutton's theory proved correct. The police tracked down Delroy Grant, who was arrested and later convicted of a series of horrific crimes. Thanks to Sutton's determination and meticulous investigation, the Night Stalker's reign of terror came to an end. It wasn't just about making an arrest. It was about bringing closure to those families, those communities. That was what mattered most. But perhaps the case that defined Colin Sutton's career more than any other was the hunt for Levi Belfield. The camera shows haunting images of the victims, their faces blurred, and police tape marking crime scenes. Then, Levi Belfield's mugshot is shown, a dark figure in a prison uniform. Belfield was a cruel and calculating predator. His victims were young women, some of whom he murdered in cold blood.
I mean, all these things, every police officer that worked on that case for 17 years wanted to solve it. And you make decisions when you're leading these things, and they can be reasonable decisions that just happen to be wrong.
Yeah, but you cracked it kind of like that. I mean, it was really, really fast police work. What was wrong with the investigation up to that point? And just tell us, what was your different approach? What did you introduce?
Well, it was very much based upon the fact that we had the DNA, and everything was predicated on DNA and using the DNA to find him. DNA is a really blunt tool to identify somebody. It's brilliant for proving they were there, but not for identifying them. all I saw was that every single offence he committed involved a burglary. So my question to myself at the beginning was, if we didn't have the DNA, what would we have? And what we had was a burglar. So I thought, how do we catch burglars? What do we do when we have prolific burglars? And essentially that's what we did. The difference being that most burglars operate in a very small area. This guy was operating over 1/4 of Greater London.
So how did you catch him?
Well, we used the skills of the crime pattern analyst to work out the target area where he was most likely to commit offences.
So you predicted that?
Yeah. And then that gave us an area small enough to flood with officers completely unseen to have a surveillance operation and wait for him to come and commit an offensive.
And how long did that take? How long did the surveillance last before you got him?
I think it was the 17th day of it that...
17 days?
It went
after
up.
17 years?
For years, Belfield evaded capture, his crimes becoming more brazen with each passing year. Belfield was one of the most dangerous men I had ever encountered. We had no idea how many women he had harmed. What we did know was that he was smart, ruthless, and elusive. What made Belfield's case so complex was his ability to blend into society. He wasn't just a criminal, he was a manipulator, someone who could hide his true nature under the guise of a normal, everyday person. But Sutton never stopped hunting him. Sutton's breakthrough came when he discovered a critical piece of evidence, an eyewitness testimony that linked Belfield to one of his victims, a young woman named Millie Dowler. This was the turning point, the moment when the investigation would shift into full force. In 2008, after years of tireless investigation, Belfield was arrested and convicted for the murders of several women. Colin Sutton's dedication had brought down a monster, and his work saved countless others from falling victim to Belfield's twisted desires. In the end, it was the victims that kept me going. Their families, their pain, their fight for justice, it fueled everything I did. For me, it was personal. Colin Sutton retired after a long and illustrious career, but his legacy remains a beacon of hope for those who seek justice. He wasn't just a detective, he was a man driven by a deep sense of purpose. His work has inspired countless others in law enforcement, and his name will forever be associated with bringing some of the most dangerous criminals in history to justice. It wasn't about being famous. It wasn't about the glory. It was about righting the wrongs, finding the truth, and making sure that the people who needed justice would get it. In the end, that's what mattered. The real manhunter, Colin Sutton. A man who hunted down killers in the darkness, bringing light where there was none. To anyone who thinks justice can't be done, I'm here to tell you that it can be. It's never easy, but if you're willing to fight for it, it's always worth it. Let's know what you think. Share your thoughts in the comments below.